If you're gonna try to be groundbreaking, you better be ready for the ground to try to break you first. I still have trust issues. Girl, go home. You still have trust issues because things didn't work out at a particular job? Stop wasting everybody's time. Nobody cares about your trust issues. Ask your doctor to give you more testosterone. This is low T behavior. Okay, believe it or not, this story was sent to me by my own father. So let's read the headline. Ex-guard sues Arizona Prison Bureau for anti-trans discrimination. Now, I'm just gonna start off by, spoiler alert, I think this is an example of not everybody is meant for every job. And just because you decide to identify or present as something else doesn't mean that you're going to be cut out for this situation. Because while this person probably thinks that they're suited to be a prison guard because they identify as a man and maybe have the same testosterone levels as an average man, that will never make you into an actual man. And even though I know in their pictures, they probably try to make it seem like they're as masculine presenting as they possibly can be, I'll show you some pictures and you can still tell that this person was born female. We'll get more into it. Let's go ahead and get into the article. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. All right, so I wanted to get to this story for a while now, and what better time than right after Trans Awareness Week. By the way, we're aware. I also find it ironic that a trans person has decided to sue Redux magazine for calling them out for being trans, which wasn't really a secret to begin with because they identify as trans. But if you want us to be aware of you, why are you trying to sue people for saying, hey, we're aware of you? But that's neither here nor there. Let's get into this particular story. Like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help me on the algorithm. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is from the New Times magazine. If you're not familiar with New Times, that's a local Phoenix magazine that's always been alternative and has had a focus on LGBT. But the thing that bothers me about the New Times magazine is it's really, really lefty. But when I was younger, I remember New Times was actually the cool magazine, and now it's just a magazine full of whiners. So we'll go ahead and read the article. You guys can decide for yourself. Of course, I'll be giving commentary as we go. In July 2017, Caden Vitellaro was hired as a correctional officer at the Arizona State Prison Complex, Tucson, hoping it was the start of a long career in law enforcement. Just a year later, however, after what he says was a persistent pattern of harassment because he is a transgender man, Vitellaro resigned. Now, after 7 years of trying to hold the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, and Recovery responsible for how he was treated, Vitellaro is suing. On July 9th, he filed a federal complaint against ADCRR, outlining the year's worth of discrimination he says he suffered while working in the state prison system. Now, I want to address this really quick, and I know that I'm interrupting myself right away. But one of the things that does bother me about people like this is that they don't understand that if you're going to be groundbreaking, you're always going to face a little bit of discrimination in that process. And this may sound silly to like new school people or people that are younger than I am, but I'm Gen X. And when I was younger, they had entire TV movies, inspirational TV movies based on a true story of people overcoming adversity. And in those stories, you would always see people deal with a fair amount of discrimination on their way up. Like when you take biological females, women being in the military. A lot of times when you would watch movies about that, it was some hard-ass old dude that didn't think that a woman should be in the military, or if it wasn't the military, some other position that a woman shouldn't have been in, and her dealing with them being extra hard on her and what you could call discriminatory towards her, and her making her way through that. Her going ahead and being like, I don't really care about that. I'm going to do this because I need to do this. And you would always see scenes where she was breaking, like crying, and just didn't know if she could do it, but she didn't cry in front of the tough old guy because she didn't want him to have the satisfaction of knowing that he got to her, and she was just going to persevere. And then at the end of the movie, you would see that she had won him over, and now we all knew that a woman was capable of doing that too. Not trying to call you a woman, but Just saying, it's a similar situation. If you're going to be a transgender man and you're going to be in a position that usually hasn't been held by a transgender man, then you've got to understand that you are going to go through at least a little bit of discrimination, and we're going to get more into that in the story and see what the discrimination was. But as long as it's not anything like SA or that kind of thing, then I don't really think that you should make a big deal of it. Be groundbreaking or stay at home. Up next line proves to be a woman. I still have trust issues. Girl, go home. Go home. You still have trust issues because things didn't work out at a particular job? Stop wasting everybody's time. Nobody cares about your trust issues. Take it up with your therapist. Ask your doctor to give you more testosterone. This is a low T behavior. I suffered from low T myself. I wasn't complaining about stuff nobody cared about, but I've dealt with low T. Trust me, what you're going through right now, low T behavior. I still have trust issues, the 39-year-old Vitellaro told Phoenix New Times and Lookout in an interview. I'm hoping to make sure no one else experiences this. They probably won't hire another trans man for this position, so you probably made it so no one else will have to go through this without even knowing you were doing it. An ADCRR spokesperson said the department cannot comment on active litigation. Nor should they. It's active litigation. You think they want to say the wrong thing and end up having to cough up even more money? I'm sure they're going to cough up something. So this person will be able to think about what happened and lick their wounds while they count money. If I know it all the way these kinds of things usually play out. Vitellaro says he began experiencing discrimination nearly from his first day as a cadet at the state's Correctional Officer Training Academy, or CODA. At the time he applied for the job, Vitellaro had already transitioned and presented as male. He had also already changed his name and the sex on his birth certificate and driver's license. Well, that's one of the reasons I don't think we should be doing all that, because it furthers the lie that you have fully transitioned. And I understand that some states do, and I understand some people think that we really should, so that people can have documentation that fully lines up with what they are. And truth be told, I've had friends that have had their sex on their documentation changed in years past. But that's when people understood that they were something different. They were always going to be something different. And that was just to make life a little bit easier for them when they had to present their ID, like when going into a bar, or if buying alcohol or cigarettes or that kind of thing. They don't have to deal with the person's judgment. It wasn't when people were trying to actually fool people into believing that that's what they were, or fool themselves into believing that that's what they were. They just didn't want to catch heat, because at that time we lived in a much more homophobic and at the time truly transphobic world, where people would actually give you a hard time about that kind of thing, and for no reason other than they just didn't agree with your lifestyle. Which to me, this is about fully acknowledging biological reality and not any judgment on this person's life. If you want to live as a man or present as a man, I have no problem with that at all. But you'll have to understand that you're never going to be an actual male. That's just not the way things work. Your bone density is different. Your height's different. There are a lot of difference between males and females. And if you're going to be something like a corrections officer, there's a good chance your little lady ass is going to get tossed if you're not careful. That's the way I honestly feel about it. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. But I have very little patience for these kinds of things, because people used to get their sex markers changed in order to make their lives easier, not to lie to themselves. Now it seems like people really do it to lie to themselves and to be like, oh, well, this clearly means I'm the same as a man, or I'm the same as a woman. No, you're not. Sorry, little man, you're just not. You aren't, Blanche. You just aren't. He intended to keep his transgender status private, sharing it only with close friends and family members, the complaint says. However, as a condition of employment, Vitellaro was required to submit documentation, including his former name, court-ordered name change, and medical history, the complaint says, that revealed his transgender status. As a result, he says he was treated differently almost immediately after starting the job. Before he reported for training at CODA in September 2017, officials there told Vitellaro that he would need to follow dress code rules for female cadets. He objected and said following the female dress code would be impossible for him. I can't imagine what the female dress code would be, but let's just go on. Just before he started at CODA, the Academy notified incoming cadets that it had adopted a standard non-gender dress code. Well, that sounds like one of those if it's a non-gender dress code where you just dress the way you know you're supposed to dress and be like, okay, cool. I guess I'm in my female dress code right now because we don't have a female dress code. It's non-gendered. But I would need more details to really have an opinion on that. Already, I'm just not liking him because this is one of the things that I hate about marginalized groups is that people from marginalized groups will sometimes join established entities and then decide that everything about those entities should change to suit them, which I feel like a lot of times LGBTQ is very much guilty of. A lot of times it is change everything for me so that I feel more comfortable. How about if you don't feel comfortable, you go somewhere where you do feel more comfortable? And on the note of like bullying and having to put up with a little bit of extra BS if you're going to be groundbreaking, I personally experienced that. I've talked about it before. When I first started doing comedy, the straight comics really did try to bully me because I was the only openly gay comedian going to all of the open mics and all the different spots. And just like I said with the story about women in the made-for-TV movies that we should watch, I went through that same thing where there were times where I really did feel like I was going to break and I was tired of everybody being mean to me. And I've talked about it on this channel before. I'm not just saying it for this particular video, but some of those people ended up becoming my biggest supporters because what I did was I dealt with all the BS they threw my way and I hit them back just as hard the same way they hit me. And that was by joking with them, which of course was at the same time bullying them back, you could say. And they ended up thinking that I was hilarious and I was really good at it. And so, like I said, some of those people are my biggest supporters to this day because they remember that they tried to break me. So in my opinion, if you're gonna try to be groundbreaking, you better be ready for the ground to try to break you first. CODA officers also told Vitellaro that he would be prohibited from using men's restrooms. Notably, unlike other states, Arizona does not have any laws prohibiting transgender people from using bathrooms that align with their gender identities. The complaint says that Vitellaro was concerned that compliance with these demeaning and humiliating directives would involuntarily disclose his transgender status. Well, that's something you're just going to have to figure out. Like, the bathrooms have become such a big battleground when it comes to trans altogether that I don't really understand what the trans side of it thinks is supposed to happen when you're in a situation where people are offering you a third space. Yeah, that may be a little inconvenient, but again, just go along with it until people respect you enough to allow you into the facilities that you feel that you align with, or just stay going to the third spaces for as long as you're working there or as long as you have to. And I would imagine that's probably part of it because as men, we don't mind trans men in the bathrooms with us in most cases. I doubt most of these guys would have really cared. They're working for a prison. They're not really probably shy like that. But at the same time, if you allow trans men to use the men's bathrooms, then that will make it so that you have to allow trans women to use the women's bathroom as well. And maybe in these facilities that are prisons, they don't really want to start playing around like that because things are different there and it will mess with morale and it will cause a bunch of problems, again, that not everybody needs. So you either go with the program or you just don't need to work there. I think I'm going to end up saying that throughout this entire article, to tell you the truth. As a result, CODA officials told him to use a private bathroom in the facility's dormitories, which was in a different building from his training classes. Vitellaro was barred from using any other bathroom facilities. He made that trek all throughout his time at CODA, which lasted roughly a month and a half. You got broken in record time. That's what I'm going to tell you. If all you could do was put up with this for a month and a half, you really weren't cut out for the job in the first place. Sorry, sister. Not a match. I don't know how to tell you this, but you're not cheerleader material. That arrangement generated questions, Vitellaro said, but things got worse once he began on-the-job training at ASPC Tucson. It was there that a correctional officer identified in the complaint as Saul Miller repeatedly referred to Mr. Vitellaro as she and her to other cadets, officers, and inmates, intentionally demeaning Mr. Vitellaro and disclosing his private transgender status to others. See, and Saul Miller was going to be that gruff old man that I talked about in the made-for-TV movie. That's the role he was going to play in your life. And guess what? If you had just acted like one of the guys and put up with what he was putting you through, which is basically just calling you by your proper gender, and probably because you really don't want to get those things confused, because if you have an area that is male specific where you can't have a person like yourself for your own safety or possibly for the safety of others, which I'm sure does happen in a prison. I'm sure even with female officers that identify as females, live as females, have never thought they were anything else, there are certain things that they won't ask them to do when it comes to dealing with males for various reasons. Sometimes for their own safety, sometimes for the safety of others. Like if you're a man going into a situation where there might be something dangerous, you probably would want to make sure that it is other men, other genetic males that have your back in that kind of situation, and they can handle what physically might come their way. Which when you're dealing with the genetic female, that may not be the case. So even though you may identify as a man, the way that you're going to perform in that kind of situation will not be the same as a genetic male. And that's something that you're just going to have to understand. So maybe it was for the purposes of clarity and not necessarily to bully you that they were referring to you by what you actually are. And I do kind of blame them because I think they should have never given you the job. But I don't think legally they're allowed to ask what your sex is. I think they just have to treat you like everybody else, and then end up dealing with whatever they deal with. Yep, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 makes it unlawful to discriminate based on someone's sex, color, national origin, race, or religion. The Arizona Civil Rights Act provides similar anti-discrimination protections for Arizona workers. So that explains it right there. They have to just treat you like everybody else, but at the same time, you gotta acknowledge that you're not like everybody else. You are not like the other boys. Get it through your thick head. Miller learned of Vitellaro's status after asking cadets if they would be comfortable performing strip searches. Vitellaro had been told that department policy prevented him from strip searching male inmates due to his transgender status. He spoke to Miller privately to inform him that he is transgender, the complaint says, but Miller used that information to demean Vitellaro, persistently and purposefully misgendering him in ways that made him feel uncomfortable, embarrassed, and unsafe. Well, if words made you feel unsafe, then you probably aren't suited to work in a prison, because guess what? That's an all the way around physically unsafe situation. Also, I'm hearing nothing about you having pulled Mr. Miller aside and told him what it is you would prefer as a transgender man. That's the other thing. In Arizona, a lot of people don't really care about that kind of stuff in the way that it's not something that they're usually educated on. And we could all argue that everybody should be educated on these things, but in certain areas, they're just not gonna be. So if you had pulled him aside and actually said, this is the way that I need to be addressed, or this is the way that I would prefer that you would address me, these are the reasons that I would prefer that you address me that way, maybe that would have been closer to getting through with him, and then you understand that every once in a while there's going to be an accidental misgendering, but I'm not hearing anything about that, and I think you probably would have included that in the story if you personally pulled this person aside, Mr. Saul Miller, and said this is the way it works when you're dealing with a transgender person like myself. I identify as a he and a him. So if you could please try your best to respect that, I would really appreciate it. I think that probably would have done more than what you're doing now. But continue with your lawsuit. I mean, let's continue with the article. When that officer referred to me as she, her around inmates, that's when I was really scared. They already knew, girl. They've been in prison for a long time. They could smell it on you. They ain't been around the poon and long enough that they're highly tuned. Never mind. Vitellaro told New Times and Lookout, that was a real moment of fear. These people are in prison. Not everyone is here for violent reasons, but some are. So misgendering can be super harmful. Work at the Gap. That's a nice, non-threatening job. I don't even know if the Gap is still open anymore. But you know what I'm saying. Find a job in retail. Do something with yourself. Prison wasn't built for you, hun. New Times and Lookout attempted to contact Miller but have not been successful. It is not clear if he still works for the ADCRR. Again, nobody's going to respond to you. They're not trying to pay out any more money than they have to because they're answering questions to lefty reporters. This makes no sense at all. I understand why you have to do that as a part of your due diligence, but you're really wasting everybody's time. Vitillaro's complaint says he filed an internal report with the department's Equal Opportunity Unit. According to the internal correspondence referenced in the lawsuit, correctional department officials found they were unable to conclude that Vitillaro had been discriminated against. Miller was given only a one-page sheet outlining examples of LGBT-related sex discrimination claims. Humiliated and deeply distressed. Per the lawsuit, that sheet of paper had little effect. When Vitillaro graduated from CODA, he was dismayed to learn he was assigned to the same residential unit as Miller. When Vitillaro expressed concerns about this and asked to be transferred to another residential unit, ADCRR instead assigned him to an administrative unit with minimal inmate contact known as Complex. Yeah, and I don't blame them, because if you don't want to do the job we told you with the person that you're going to be working with, then let's give you something that's probably a little more suited to what and who you are. Because clearly you have problems just sticking with the program, and prisons just really aren't built for a lot of individual personalities and individual thinking. I mean, I've had friends that work for prisons before, and what they tell me is it really is kind of a shut up and do your job type of environment. I mean, they're able to express their personalities with each other, and a few of them really did enjoy like the combat part of it. But they said that there were times that they actually had to take people down. And these are gay men working in the prisons, but they're actual men. They're not like girly gay men are trying to go in there being something different. Actually, they never discussed that with people because they wanted to just be treated like everybody else, which when you're trans, that's not always going to be an option because like they said in this article, they actually had to disclose all that information in order to get the job because I'm sure there's security clearances that they need to be approved for. And so it's just all the way not a good fit. As soon as they asked that, you should have been like, yeah, this probably isn't going to be for me. Like I said, go to the mall. As a result, he says he was denied essential skills development that other new officers received by supervising inmates. Well, you weren't going to be doing that anyway. They decided you weren't good for that. You decided you weren't good for that when you complained. And so who cares? Like, you don't need those skills. Just sit at the desk, file some things, hun. Make yourself busy. Vitillaro's attorney, Joseph Wardensky, said Vitillaro did not want to be assigned to Complex, where he worked for more than half a year, and simply wanted to work in another residential unit. The differential treatment sparked rumors about his gender identity and led to staff and correctional officers talking about him and discussing his transgender status behind his back, the complaint says. People are always gonna. You know, I used to hang out with a trans man named Tyler that identified as gay. I realized that there's no way for him to be gay. Tyler was basically a heterosexual female, but he identified as gay. And when he wasn't around, before we knew he was actually trans, we had been told by somebody at the bar, some shady queen had tipped us off, and we would all talk about him and be like, is he or is he not? And then he ended up dating my friend Dwayne, and they were in a gay relationship that really wasn't technically a gay relationship. Like I said, they were living it out as heterosexual cosplay, but neither here nor there. We all treated him the same as everybody else, but that's always going to be a part of it when you're something different, is people are going to talk about you a little bit behind your back. I mean, I know a lot of people talk about me behind my back because I have a lot of piercings and I have a lot of tattoos, but I don't really care about it. I think it's a bad thing if people aren't talking about you. That's the way I feel about it, Mr. Vitillaro. To work in a residential unit, ACDRR officials told Vitillaro he would have to follow rules for female officers, including shouting "female on the run" whenever he entered a men's residential unit, literally requiring him to shout his transgender status for all to hear. Additionally, ADCRR told him that the department policy classifies correctional officers based on their genitalia and breastises. I know it's breast, but I like saying breastises. Which meant Vitillaro had to be treated as a woman instead of a man. To justify that policy, ADCRR cited the Federal Prison Elimination Act, which I looked a little bit into that, and is to avoid prisoners being sexually mistreated by the guards. It is what it is. You know, again, it isn't a match. Sometimes we have to understand, if we're gonna live in this society and let people present the way that they want to present, or I shouldn't say let, because that sounds bad, but if people are going to present however they want to present, I am very much a fan of us being like, yeah, certain things just aren't going to be available to you, or you're going to have to make accommodations so that you fit in that space, or so that you're able to do what you supposedly want to do. So if you have problems with the fact that they have to treat you as a female and according to your genitalia for that particular job, either do it and shut up or go get another job. So Prison Elimination Act, PREA for short. PREA was passed in 2003 to deter the sexual assault of prisoners. During Vitillaro's employment with ADCRR, an updated 2014 version of the law was in effect. Contrary to ADCRR policy, though, PREA guidelines state that law enforcement facilities should treat transgender corrections officers according to their gender identity, not biological sex. Well, I think the president would probably disagree, and I think that even if you took this all the way up to the Supreme Court, they would disagree as well. You should not be treated according to your gender. You are what you are, especially in this type of situation. You're dealing with safety. Also, trans people are always telling us that men can get pregnant, which means trans men can get pregnant. And we've seen some of the stuff that some of these guards have been doing, sometimes on particular websites that you have to pay a couple dollars to see their action. But we know that this could be a bad mix. So you have to deal with the lady rules if you're going to be in there. It's what it is. You're a female. I cannot stress this enough. I don't know why I have to keep telling you. You should already know this. You're the one that had to transition. You know your biology. Get over it, Mary. Wardensky said ADCRR has incorrectly been citing PREA to explain its treatment of Vitillaro. You're also Vitillaro's lawyer, so you're going to say anything that you have to say so that he keeps that money coming, even if you know that eventually he's going to lose this case and have given you a bunch of money for absolutely nothing, because there's really nothing you can probably do about most of this. They're blaming PREA, saying it requires them to treat trans employees this way, Wardensky said. It's clear in PREA that identity should be the most important thing, yet for years, the Department of Corrections has been misreading that policy and using a law intended to protect inmates from sexual assault to discriminate against trans employees like Mr. Vitillaro. In May 2018, after Vitillaro successfully obtained a waiver to maintain his facial hair from the then warden Julie Roberts, which required discussing his trans status, Roberts abruptly reassigned him from complex to the prison male unit, which he took as a demotion. Okay, so you had to get a waiver so that you could keep your facial hair, probably because it helps you with your gender dysphoria and makes you feel more manly, which isn't a regular thing. And if you're just having trouble going along with the program, then like I said, you probably just shouldn't be there, because it's like they keep having to transfer you to different things that will suit your needs, because they probably can't fire you because they realize that they'll end up facing some kind of suit for discrimination, which is what ended up happening anyway. So it really didn't do any good to try their best to accommodate you, even though you're the one that's looking for the accommodations, because you just don't want to go with the program the way it is. Like I said, it is about special accommodations, special treatment, and you wanting to be something different than what you were born. That's what it comes down to. It's not just about the trans thing in that one particular way. It really is you wanting everybody to live in the land of make-believe and make special accommodations for you, because you want to do this job that really you're just proving that you're not cut out for. You're just not enough of a soldier to do this job, madam. In at least one meeting with Roberts, the complaint says she asked Vitillaro invasive and embarrassing questions about his genitalia and whether he planned to have genital surgery. Vitillaro was humiliated and deeply distressed by being forced to discuss his genitalia with the warden. Well, she's the warden. And if you want to be treated like a man, and they've already said they go according to breast and genitalia, maybe she's asking you these questions to see if after you have your surgeries, which I'd imagine you haven't had, or you probably wouldn't be embarrassed about those questions. But after you've had your surgeries, maybe they would be able to put you into those slots because technically then they can. And that may sound crazy, but maybe that was the reason she was asking you about that, is because maybe she does want to play ball with you. Maybe she does want to let you be able to live out your dream and be where you think you should be. But she knows there's a certain way things work, so she figured she'd ask you these questions to get to know you better, see what your plan is, see if she could possibly shoehorn you into one of these spots so that you can be where you want to be. Maybe that's the reason, if I'm being generous. Also, maybe she just wanted to know. Every once in a while, girls gossip. The warden isn't immune to it. But I really don't think that's why. I think that maybe she was just trying to figure it out for other reasons. In June of that year, Roberts reassigned Vitellaro to a residential unit, but told him that he would still be required to announce himself as female every time he entered. Upon hearing the news, he immediately experienced a panic attack, felt physically sick, and began to experience severe emotional distress. Girl, you got verklempt? Now, if I'm reading this correctly, you wanted to be at a residential unit. So the warden went ahead and put you in a residential unit, but was like, this is what you're going to have to do in order for me to put you in this residential unit. So you got what it is you wanted because you saw being sent to the mailroom as a demotion, and you didn't like being in the complex for that minute. So you wanted to be back in a residential. So they put you back in a residential that isn't what that guy Saul Miller, and now you're still not happy. So there's no way they're going to be able to do things the way that you want them done unless they do things exactly to the letter that you want them done. So while you're trying to say they're not playing ball, you're not playing ball. And I blame you in all of this. Panic attack, felt physically sick, and began to experience severe emotional distress. This is why not everybody's meant to be a man. That's all I'm going to say. Fearing for his safety, Vitellaro opted to use up all of his remaining leave time. When that time ran out in July, he resigned rather than comply with directives that would put him in harm's way. You ran and hid. Okay, so whose problem is that? Quote, to be told to do something that doesn't align with who you are is pretty damaging, he told the New Times and Lookout. I'm very strong-willed and will handle a lot until I break, but that was my limit. Well, it seemed like you kept breaking. It seemed like you kept breaking all along the way until you finally broke for good. So you're probably lying to yourself on that. You're not strong. You identify as strong. I get it, but that's not the same thing. The legal case. Before his resignation, Vitellaro retained an attorney, not Wardenski, to explore his options for protection at work. The attorney asked that ADCRR change his policy, forcing him to announce himself as female or to reassign him to complex or another unit with minimal inmate contact. Okay, so now you want to go back to complex or possibly another unit? What is this, Burger King? You think you're going to have it your way? Sorry, not going to happen. You left. You resigned. Nobody cares. Be gone. Go do something else with yourself. A salon. Work in a salon. Possibly the host at a restaurant. Don't even go into construction. You'll waste everybody's time there too. The complaint says the department failed to respond to those entreaties. Oh, before his resignation, Vitellaro retained an attorney, not Wardenski, to explore his options for protection at work. The attorney asked that I know that it shouldn't be this way, but that's almost anywhere you go. Once you get an attorney and have them contact your work, even if you're still technically working for them, you're on leave, you might as well quit that job, because nobody's going to want to deal with you after that, because they know that you're going to be a lawsuit. They already know that. So they might as well just not violate your rights any further and get you out of there. And understand that I am definitely not against people suing other people when they have legitimate cases. And maybe this will fall under a legitimate case when it comes down to it legally. But you should always know that if you contact an attorney and have them get in contact with your work, you're as good as gone at that job. It's over. It's done. In 2019, Vitellaro submitted a charge of discrimination against ADCRR to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. After an investigation that took 5 years, the EEOC wrote last September that reasonable cause existed that ADCRR violated his rights. On April 4th of this year, the EEOC sent Vitellaro a right to sue letter, clearing the way for the lawsuit. Vitellaro is seeking compensatory damages in the suit. He's also seeking front pay to compensate him for his lost earnings, as he has been forced to work lower paying jobs since resigning as a correctional officer. A lawsuit could take a year or more to resolve, and the current political environment under President Trump makes the resolution even more uncertain. Shortly after Trump took office in January, he issued executive orders that targeted trans people. Wardensky said that as soon as this happened, the EEOC dropped approximately 7 employment discrimination lawsuits that they had already filed on behalf of transgender people. Like I said, good luck, honey. Vitellaro's case had not yet been filed when this took place, but Wardensky said it became immediately clear that the federal government would not be taking further action on his behalf. Wardensky hopes Arizona, led by Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs, who has routinely vetoed anti-trans bills since entering office in 2023, picks up the slack. ADCRR is run by one of Hobbs' employees. I recently heard that Katie Hobbs might be going through some legal trouble, allegedly. That's what I heard. I need to look into it a little bit more. But I don't think Katie Hobbs is really going to be doing a lot to try to get in the way of this or to help this along, because I think her plate may be full with her own problems, if what I read is correct. We'll see. What I hope Arizona does is look at any discrimination policies that require places like ADCRR to treat trans men as women and realize it's at odds with civil rights laws, Wardensky said. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that. We're not seeing much change from when Ducey was in office, who was a Republican governor. We have not seen any interest from the state in getting rid of these harmful policies. I hope the Hobbs administration, which has come out to denounce anti-trans legislation, will revisit this. A spokesperson from Hobbs' office did not respond to requests for comment. In the meantime, Vitellaro is focused on moving forward. He now works for an LGBTQ plus owned company and is involved in local trans support groups. He hopes his case shines a light on issues that affect trans employees and spurs lawmakers and officials to put more protective policies in action. When you're transitioning, you're already going through a lot of changes. Wonder if that's why they call it transitioning, he said. You're transitioning because you want to be seen for who you are. And when you're in the spaces that discourage that, it messes with your mental health. I have a really strong support system now and have gained a lot of confidence back. This is the line I have trouble with. You're transitioning because you want to be seen for who you are. Okay, well, I'm going to be really controversial here. And I'm going to say that you are what you were born. If you want to be seen for what you really are, you are born either male or female. And people are going to treat you according to that, especially in things that require any kind of physicality. And that works both ways. If you were born male, you were born stronger, faster, all that stuff, than your female counterparts. If you were born female, then you're probably not going to be as strong. You're probably not going to be as fast. Your bone density is going to be different than your male counterparts. So if you really want to be seen for who you really are, that's who you really are. How about you start seeing yourself for who you really are and stop asking everybody else to see you as something different from what you really are because you're not comfortable with who you really are. How about we do that? Can we do that? And I really do mean that. And that's how I'm going to wrap this up, is just by saying we have to accept that if we're going to allow trans to be a thing legally, a thing that's recognized, because obviously every adult in this country has the right to do everything that they're legally allowed to do that's constitutionally protected, which means the way you dress, the way you express yourself, even the way you identify is all up to you and at your discretion. But if you want to be legally covered as a trans person in any way, or have that recognized in any way at all, you're going to have to understand that there are going to have to be certain guardrails and guidelines and exceptions in some cases that you're going to have to make in order to accommodate for the fact that genetically, biologically, you are something different than whatever you present as. And not everybody has to change everything to accommodate what's going on in your brain, especially when it could be a risk to physical safety, whether that's your own or the people you work with. And that's 100% where I'm at on it. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. I appreciate you watching. If you want to see another video of my silliness, click the video on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.